Hi, Dave Smith here. This is the second video in my short series of getting ready for wet plate. I've shot wet plate before, but not since I was in Sweden, and then I bought these cameras specifically for wet plate, and they've been in storage ever since because, well, imagine carting that around the world on short contracts. But now I've settled back in Britain, I've decided to get set up again for wet plate. Still waiting for one or two small pieces, but I think I'm not too far away now. Very excited. So my last video was about lenses. Oh dear. My last video was about lenses. Sorry, I was distracted by the notifications there. But I forgot to mention prices. So on this camera at the moment, I've got the Industar 450. I haven't yet found a way to mount the 600mm. I'm still thinking about that. I wondered whether the 450 would cover this size, but it does. So that's a bit of a bonus. This was only about £50, a real bargain. This is a Fujinar in a Chanel 5BS. The Chanel 5BS was specifically made for the 180-210 and 250mm Fujinar lenses. And I originally bought the Chanel, which had a 210mm lens in it. I can't remember what that cost, maybe £70. Seems to ring a bell. The Fujinar came along, the 250mm Fujinar, which covers 10x8, came along a little later. And in between times I'd tried the Congo, which doesn't fit in that, although the Congo is supposed to be just a rebadged Fujinar. So I sent that back and I got the Fujinar. So that whole kit there, including that that shutter, is probably about £300, so a little bit more expensive, and I still have to have that shutter CLA'd. The 600mm Industar was about £200, so just to catch up on that last video. But what I want to talk about today are cameras. That's why I'm flanked by these two behemoths. Now, I decided that I wanted these larger format cameras because I want excuse me, just have a drink of my tea, that's what I'll do. Because what I wanted, I'm a portraitist really, and portraits and landscapes, I guess that covers most of photography these days. So I wanted to make portraits and also landscapes and architectural shots and so on, just things that look beautiful, I guess. I wanted to do them in wet plate, and I wanted to have sizes that would be meaningful on somebody's wall, and I think the minimum there is going to be 10x8. But I also wanted this much larger one just to be more imposing on somebody's wall as a one-off piece of art. So this is a 12x20. Now these are pretty standard fare for field cameras these days. The technical monorail cameras will give you way more movements, much more complex, but these are pretty much the design for field cameras. So you have pretty well all the movements on the front. So this whole front assembly here will shift it to each side, and you can see here by the amount by which it'll shift each way, so it's quite a lot of shift. You could definitely do pretty good panoramas with that, for example. So that'll shift, it'll turn, so you've got front swing, you've got front panel tilt, you can go forwards and backwards, and rise and fall. So that's pretty much all the movement you'll ever get on a large format camera. The back is more limited. Now, as I say, on a monorail technical camera, you'll get pretty much the same movements on the back as you get on the front. It's a bit less necessary, and especially so if you're shooting landscapes, really useful for product photography. But this will tilt forwards and backwards just a little. And that's all about the Scheinflug principle, and you can see a video. I'll try to link my Scheinflug principle video. I have a couple actually. So those are the cameras that I went for, and I decided to have these handmade. And they're made by this company, Svedowski, who are from Poland. The cameras are beautiful. They're incredibly well made. The wood, I think, is cherry. And they're excellent. They're not overpriced. This was about £1,500, and that's about standard. That's about where they are, I think, if you go looking. This was expensive. This was about 5,000, but it's massive, of course. So they make beautiful cameras, but my goodness, they don't do time very well. So I was promised 6 to 8 months on these. This one took about 10 or 11 months. This was 13 months. So provided you're not in a desperate rush, then these guys will make you a camera, and they'll make you a beautiful camera. But there are other guys around who are making these handmade cameras. There's VDS in Hungary, I think, which make beautiful cameras. Maybe a touch more expensive, and you don't get these great flight cases with those and so on. So there are people around. There are Chinese makers that make all metal cameras, and you'd think that would be really heavy, but it isn't really. So if you want a camera like this, then there are plenty of makers, but of course there's stuff online as well. Now, you'd think that if you went to eBay that you'd get something much cheaper, but you won't. With one exception. I'll come to that in a moment. Because a lot of the eBay account, at these sizes, they're pretty rare on eBay. This is called a banquet camera, and they're Fulmer Schwing used to make banquet cameras in the early part of the 1900s, but they're incredibly rare, so it's actually quite difficult to get a camera in this format, and actually in any format at this size, say a 16 by 24 or a 24 by 24, very, very rare for them to come up. So if you wanted one at that size, you're probably getting it made. There are 10 by 8s around second hand, but again, not that many, and certainly not as many as you would imagine. And consequently, they're quite expensive when they come up. So it's cost effective to have these things made, strangely. So you can potentially get them, but I think if you're going for these very large sizes, you're going to have them made. So that's those. Now, there's another sort of breed of camera, if you like. There are a few companies. I can't easily bring any to mind. There's a company in America. Name begins with Black something. I might try and look that up and put that in the description. Now, what they make is replicas of the old style wet plate cameras. Now, the old style cameras wouldn't have all this sort of movement. This front panel would be pretty solid. You wouldn't get the panel moving, but you would get the lens mount, the lens panel moving. The lens would go on a kind of oblong of wood that would slide in two rails, so you'd be able to slide it side to side, but you couldn't get rise and fall, and you couldn't get swing, and you couldn't get tilt. These front panels just went back and forwards, and that was all. So you could focus them. Similarly on the back. And the back would have a glass door that would open, and into there you would put your wet plate holder. So the door closes, you've got your ground glass, your focus swings right round, put your wet plate holder in, take your picture. The mounts these days are a little bit different, and these have what are called bail backs. I'll turn it around, and I'll do that now. I'll turn it around and show you. A bail is this thing here that lifts against the springs so that you can easily slide your film holder in there. Those are relatively new inventions in these things. They weren't common early on. So the way you would do it would be to have this swinging door. And there are replicas of those around. Now, in the old days, when all this first started, you would get the sizes weren't like they are now. What you would get would be something called a whole plate camera. Now, whole plate is 6 and a bit by 8 and a bit inches, and then you would get half plate cameras, quarter plate cameras, eighths, and I think you'd also get 16ths. So you can get those made for you, and those in replica. You can find those fairly cheaply, I think, on eBay, but they're often in need of some TLC, and I would suggest that many of those need a woodworker to bring them back to life. You'll need to replace the bellows on those, and that can be an aggravation. There are people who make bellows. There's a company called Custom Bellows, for example, that will make you a bellows, not cheap, but it's all possible. So those are some of the cameras. Now, I came across some guys in Brussels, Braxton Studio, and I'll try and put that link in the description as well. And these guys were trying to make the smallest possible wet plate, and they did indeed succeed, and they made wet plates. And I kid you not, I saw these things in the flesh, so to speak, about the size of your thumbnail. So that's kind of a record in one direction. I don't think they would make an imposing piece of wall art, but there was a little project they were working on. And I think they used a Minox camera or something of that sort. Maybe an old sort of compact, those very early slim things. I can't remember what the format was now, but it was tiny. So the point I'm making is you can adapt any camera you like. If you can open the back, fit a piece of glass in against the pressure plate, and you can shoot with it. And many people do that on old 6x6 centimetre medium format cameras, and that's another possibility. Many of those can be had pretty cheaply, especially the TLRs, the twin lens reflex cameras. So that's also a possibility. And then there's a guy with a great YouTube channel, I will link that as well, a guy called Borut Peterlin, and he shoots on an old Kodak Brownie 3A, which I think looks like it might be 6x9, but it could be 6x12 even. It's a very old folding camera, and the back just flips down, and you put your glass plate in and you're good to go. You always have to load that in the dark, but that's not really a problem. And we'll talk about that at a later video as well. So now those can be had for around £100 on eBay. You'd probably want to get the lens CLA'd, so that's another £50-60. So plenty of possibilities for cameras. You don't, if you're looking to try out wet plate, but you don't want to invest this sort of money in it, then some of these cameras are a great alternative. And you might have an old film camera lying about that you just don't use anymore, and this would be a nice way to repurpose that. And it allows you to give the whole thing a go. If you don't like it, well, you haven't put that much money into it. If you do like it, then you can upgrade your gear. You can get yourself a larger camera. Now, one way to go would be 5x4. There are loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of 5x4 large format cameras for sale second hand. The lenses are much cheaper, they're much more plentiful, the cameras are more plentiful, and the cameras are much cheaper. And I would say you can probably get a 5x4 with a lens for £200 or £300, an old Graflex for example. So not too difficult to get into it, and the nice thing about 5x4 is that you are starting to get into large format, you're starting to get into a size that you can see what's going on, and those could be scanned, for example. Then you could use the digital version to make your prints, to make it nice imposing prints. A 5x4 will scan big enough to give you any size print. So my strongest advice, if you're just getting into it and you want to do this as cost effectively as possible, but you don't want to invest too much money in it, is go for 5x4. Get yourself a relatively cheap system off eBay, camera and lens. Probably will come with some holders, but if it doesn't, the holders are dirt cheap as well. And I'll talk in a subsequent video about how we can repurpose those double dark slides for wet plate. But that's about what I've got to say for cameras. If you are getting into this and you're interested in getting involved with wet plate, I'd love to hear what you're shooting with, and love to hear your thoughts about what camera you're going to use, what size you're going to shoot at, and I'd love to see some examples as well. And once I've got myself set up and going, I'm going to show you some what I call field notes, some vlogs about the setup, the taking of these things, the making of wet plates. It's a little way to come yet, but that's where I'm headed with this series. So get in touch, let me know what you're doing. My next video in this series is going to be about lighting, because that's kind of complex, and this process is incredibly slow. So for example, if you shot paper negatives that you'd use photographic paper instead of photographic film, you probably got a speed of about 6 to 8 ISO. 6 to 8. You imagine that with your digital cameras that can do 128,000 ISO or something. Okay, I say they can do it, but you know, they'll record something. So paper negative 6 to 8. Wet plate about 0.75 ISO. So wet plate is what, 1, 2, 3 or 4 stops less sensitive than your paper negative. If you shoot typically at say 200, then your paper negative is, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 stops. So you're from ISO 200 to wet plate, you're about 10 stops less sensitive, and you have to find the light. One way people do that is the very fast lenses, and we've talked about those, but there are other ways to deal with it as well. So next time, lighting. Thanks very much for watching. Bye for now.